Here's two guys who can handle the truth.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
But we can. Xavier, Will, Scott, Goebel. RX Muscle Australia proudly presents Aussie Muscle Radio. Yeah!
Welcome back to Aussie Muscle Radio. This week I'm joined once again by Matt Legge, the Chief Scientist at ATP. Matt, welcome back to Aussie Muscle Radio.
Thanks for having me again, Xavier.
It's our pleasure. We got some good feedback last week from the show we did. Obviously people, noticed you had a fair bit of knowledge behind, what you were kind of putting out there and stuff. So we had a few questions come through. We had one from a guy called Matt, and then the other one was, I don't know who it was from because they didn't sign off on their name or anything. They just emailed me. So we'll kick off with the first one. Matt asked, he says, what are your thoughts on metabolic damage as it's been named? He says, is there any truth to this or has it been blown out of proportion?
Well, with metabolic damage, it's not something I've seen a huge amount of research on. It's more comes from anecdotal reports with the guys that are prepping for comp. What they find works one time doesn't always work for their next comp prep. There's a few different reasons for that, but nothing that's been directly isolated that I know of. One of the causes for that they have discussed is the depletion of certain nutrients required for certain enzyme systems. For example, when you deplete your body of carbohydrates to force the burning of fat, it upregulates enzymes like carnitine, palmitoyltransferase, which are purely carnitine dependent. Depletion of that carnitine stores can lead to an inability to burn fat. But what people notice is even loading up on high doses of carnitine, it just still doesn't seem to work again. So the big thing with metabolic damage is looking at the rates at which receptors are sensitive to different hormones, such as insulin and glucagon, and also the ability for the little enzyme systems inside the cells to be able to metabolize fat or do any particular function at a great rate without becoming depleted in those necessary cofactors. Some of those simple cofactors, things like zinc and selenium, they're involved in so many different enzymes within the body. If we're not getting adequate levels of those nutrients through our diet, especially if we're on restricted diets, then certain enzyme systems will pretty much just stop working. The body has to then find another way of producing that energy, which can lead to muscle damage and that sort of thing.
Yeah, if people obviously, this happened, they've, depleted the enzymes and stuff, how do you structure someone's diet to, correct this?
Well, you got to have you can do testing. Like the cool thing now is you can do metabolic profile testing, where you can actually measure the energy production pathways within the cell. And it'll isolate if there's any particular enzymes that aren't working efficiently. And then we can go and have a look at what the cofactors for those particular enzymes are. The reason why I mentioned zinc and selenium is they're some of the most common deficiencies, in particular in Australia. And they become depleted very rapidly if your levels aren't very good. The problem is we can have a look at foods and say, okay, well, he's eating a lot of foods that are high in zinc and selenium, such as nuts and seeds and, protein and that sort of stuff. But depending on the farming processes, the quality of soil, Australia is notoriously low in zinc and selenium. A lot of people then supplement with things like ZMA or other products, but you just need to make sure that you get the right nutrients for the right enzyme systems. Otherwise, they just don't work.
Is zinc and selenium, are these things you should actually supplement with, or should it be something that you're probably a bit more careful with, where you get tested and then you kind of supplement to, get your levels optimal? Because, I hear a lot of people say, there's a lot of selenium in Brazil nuts and things like that, but I've heard also people say that zinc isn't something you should, take too much of. You shouldn't be, taking excessive amounts of zinc just because you think, a little bit's good, then a lot must be better.
Yeah, that's true. You can get too much selenium. It can be toxic. Zinc's an interesting one. It's what we call a chelating compound. It binds to things that are typically positively charged, which could inhibit the absorption of iron, calcium, magnesium. So the best way to do it is to go through, make sure you're taking enough to prevent deficiencies. I usually get people to supplement with a small amount, but the crazy big, huge doses are just not necessary. Taking huge amounts of these things doesn't necessarily drive the enzymes to get faster. It's more important to just prevent deficiencies and make sure they're capable of happening. There's over 500 different enzyme systems that are zinc and selenium dependent. So it's really hard to just measure each one of those. Those metabolic profile testings are really cool for that sort of stuff because you can see patterns. So you can go through and find out what the enzymes require, and if you see patterns of enzymes that aren't working efficiently, you can actually find certain B vitamins, zinc, selenium, what cofactors may be consistent with each of those enzyme systems.
Yep. Now, obviously, you mentioned about the supplementing with ZMAs. It's got the zinc in there, the magnesium. I think it's vitamin B6. I think it is. Now, the zinc in there, is that? Do you think that's an adequate amount, or is that more than you would actually recommend people supplementing with?
Typical dose that we give with zinc, we only need about 10 to 20 milligrams per day. It also depends on the type of zinc. I'm not sure what actual type of zinc they put in that particular product, but with zinc, often you can get a zinc oxide that gets really poor absorption. People will fill things up with that because it's really cheap. Yep. Zinc gluconate is a little bit better absorption. Zinc sulfate has a relatively poor absorption and can cause a fair bit of nausea if it doesn't get absorbed rapidly. Zinc citrate, and the best one is zinc picolinate. If you can get a zinc picolinate, you get the best form of absorption. So what you'll find with zinc, if you can't absorb it, it just floats around in the stomach, and it can make you taste like a mineral. It can make you quite nauseous. You can actually do a zinc taste test. You can get zinc. They do a zinc sulfate, a liquid zinc sulfate. Put a little bit of that on your tongue. If you're zinc deficient, the zinc gets absorbed really quickly, and you don't taste anything. If you are loaded up with zinc, you've got plenty of zinc. It doesn't absorb very fast at all, and the zinc sulfate just sits on the tongue, and that leaves a very mineral, furry sort of effect.
That's awesome. Where do they test for stuff like this? Do you do these kind of tests?
Most pharmacies do that. You can do it. There's a couple of companies that provide zinc sulfate liquids. I've just got some in the lab that I just throw down people's throat to see what happens, and just ask if they and they'll often just say it tastes like they licked the carpet or something, and I know their zinc levels are nice and high. We do a similar thing for iodine. You can put a little bit of iodine on the skin and it goes orange. If the body wants the iodine, it will absorb it. If it doesn't, it'll leave that iodine on the skin, leaving a orange stain.
I think that's one that a lot of people would be interested in as well, because I know, from what I've heard, a fair few people actually are low in iodine, and this is, correlates with thyroid function, which is something we're going to talk about in a future episode. How big a factor do you think deficiency in iodine is to thyroid function?
Oh, it's massive. And then again, in Australia, it's really weird. We are really low in iodine typically. Iodine comes from the ocean, and we're a coastal living population. Normally you see massive iodine deficiencies up in the Himalayas and places like that, where they don't get much iodine. They're so far from the ocean and they don't have much seafood, But even though we live close to the ocean, we don't eat the sea vegetables like the Japanese do. We don't have a huge diet of iodine-loaded fish and that sort of thing. So they're even trying to talk about fortifying our foods. They have fortified salt and breads and that sort of stuff with iodine, but it's still, Australia's really poor levels of iodine. Yeah, and that's a massive thing with thyroid function, because if you get, basically your thyroid hormones will be made out of tyrosine and iodine as the main cofactors for that.
Yeah, and I actually got my thyroid function tested, and all I did was basically added in iodized sea salt, and I had a little bit of that every morning and a few times a day. And I noticed my thyroid function went up quite a bit, significantly. It went from about 1 or 1.5 to 2.5, so it did make a rather big difference, just that, adding that small amount of iodine via salt.
Yeah, it's one of the first places to start. So if you suspect that you've got a low thyroid, then the first place to start is just topping up the iodine. The zinc and selenium, because, I mentioned that they are involved in a lot of the enzymes. they're involved in these types of enzymes called deiodinases, and their job is to convert the inactive T4 that comes out of the thyroid, which is made of tyrosine and iodine predominantly, through to T3 and then through to T2. So a combination of an iodine deficiency, zinc and selenium deficiency is the main cause for what we call subclinical low thyroid or hypothyroidism. You know, in the absence of thyroid disease, most people sitting out there with borderline dodgy thyroids. And the problem is too, in Australia in particular, the reference range when you go, you would have seen this when you measure your thyroid, the reference range for the normal healthy levels of thyroid are huge. They've included all these people with dodgy thyroid.
To about 4.
Yeah, and all the people with a dodgy thyroid are included in the healthy range. So they're comparing a lot of people to other people with a dodgy thyroid. We used to do iodine tests, and we'd also measure basal body temperature checks to measure the iodine before we went ahead and went and did the blood testing. Thyroid regulates your body temperature by burning fat for heat. You know, thermogenesis is how the thyroid controls your body temperature. So, measuring your basal body temperature is one way to see what your thyroid status is like. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure. A lot of people as well. I'm sure yourself actually looks at these blood tests and you kind of almost shakes your head. I mean, I've been to the doctor and I've had my vitamin D's level checked and everything, and I had my vitamin D checked, and I was, I think I was below normal, and I was taking 1,000 IU of vitamin D a day, and my doctor said, I recommend you take a little bit of vitamin D a day, and he said, I said I already am. I said I'm taking 1,000 IU, and he said, well, don't take any more then. Don't take any more. That's heaps enough. That's plenty enough. But I was still below normal, and I kind of said, why wouldn't I take any more? And he said, taking more is dangerous. And it's doctors are really, some doctors out there are really recommending things or not recommending things they don't know perhaps enough about. And I started taking 5,000 IU of vitamin D a day, and I was right in normal, and I was probably slightly on the upper edge of normal. So it's these ranges are, if you're one point under or you're 1 point over, that's the difference between being normal and not normal, and that's not really the story.
And it's weird, this thyroid. There's something weird going on with this vitamin D testing anyway, because so many people are coming in deficient in vitamin D. I mean, I went in there, I do a lot of stuff out in the sun, I even almost sunburnt, go in and my vitamin D comes in low. I've been talking to a lot of old school pathologists and old school nurses about it, and they were telling me the way they were taught to measure vitamin D was to, draw the blood, cover it, supposed to cover the sample with, an alfoil and then hide it in their pocket and put it straight into a bag, because the test itself may not be viable if it gets exposure to light. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. There's something weird going on there, interesting. Because the stats of vitamin D, we got these stats of everyone getting too much sun and too much sun damage and sun cancers and stuff like that, yet all these vitamin D tests are coming in deficient. It's just something weird going on there. Vitamin D is also made from cholesterol too, so, all these people taking cholesterol medications, one of the most popular medications out there, and it can be a contributing factor for low vitamin D. But they don't talk about that, so it's something weird, man. I'm going to keep researching that, because that bugs the hell out of me. I see it all the time in the clinic, and even these people, like you're saying, they're taking vitamin D. Their vitamin D levels are still really, really low. And they're getting ample sunlight and that sort of stuff. So it's a bit of a minefield as a practitioner, because you can't really tell people to spend more time in the sun without getting in trouble for inducing sun cancer, And and then the next time they're saying, you need more vitamin D. So I don't know. Maybe they just want us all to buy vitamin D.
Do you think it's actually because, people are obviously getting out in the sun, mate, like you said, they're getting these sun cancers, they're getting melanomas and stuff like that. Do you think it's maybe because the standard person now, or the average person, has a lot higher levels of inflammation in their body, and it's actually developing into these cancers?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the whole point with cancers is, it's just a cell cycle that's gone too fast. They've missed the checkpoints, So what's supposed to happen in a cell as it develops and grows, it's supposed to have checkpoints that's supposed to identify whether that cell is dodgy or not. And then what you'll actually find happening is these checkpoints are basically are supposed to pick up if a cell is dodgy and induce a self-destruct mechanism. But what happens if these cell cycles get stimulated to run too fast from inflammation carcinogens, toxins. These things actually make the cell cycle progress at a rate at which the checkpoints don't work, and then all of a sudden these cells are progressing. There's nothing in there saying you're a dodgy cell, self-destruct. The whole concept of using antioxidants and that sort of stuff is to actually slow down the cell cycle to allow the checkpoints to work.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure. Now, we'll move off all that subject and we'll move on to our second question. Mm-hmm. Now, this question says, you hear of a lot of top IFBB pros, including Jay Cutler, Ronnie Coleman, and numerous others, only sleeping 4, 5 or 6 hours a night and training twice a day, and that's not including cardio. He says, is there negative ramifications for these guys doing this, or is it because of what they're taking they're able to do such things?
Yeah. Oh, and well, both, so you do your regeneration and repair when you're asleep. Okay, so when we're asleep at night, we go into a big low cortisol trough, which allows our body to actually start becoming fully anabolic. And we get big switches in the hormonal profile, and we start doing our regeneration and repair. So for someone with a normal level of hormone or a low level of hormone, they're going to need a lot of sleep to actually allow enough time for that regeneration and repair to occur with the resources they have available. If you're not getting adequate sleep and that sort of stuff, one way of compensating for that is to increase the amount of anabolic hormones that your body's exposed to in that period of time that you're sleeping. So sleep's extremely important for resetting the adrenals and regenerating and repair and healing everything over. But like I was saying, the thing that actually does that while you're asleep is the exposure to the anabolic hormones and the lack of catabolic hormones. So if you can compensate for that by using high doses of anabolic hormones, well, you can get away with less sleep and do more growth. But if you did both, if you had more sleep and you had these anabolic compounds in your system, and you'd be able to grow bigger and faster.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you think, obviously having 4 or 5 hours of sleep, you're not going to get that proper melatonin release like you normally would if you're sleeping, 8, 9 or 10 hours and obviously getting a lot less light. Is this obviously, unless they're taking obviously an outside source of melatonin, is this bad for them?
Yeah, you're better off. Yeah, you always, I'm a naturopath too, so I'm a bit biased, so I always want everyone to go everything fully natural. I used to do a lot of work up North Queensland with the mining community where they're all shift working. And you could definitely tell the guys that were doing the night shift, they have to have that room pitch black during the day to actually get some melatonin action happening. But even still, unless we went and supplemented with extra melatonin, they just weren't getting that regeneration and repair. And the biggest side effect they were complaining of was fatigue, inflammation, injuries, and just preserving fat, breaking down muscle. So, yeah, the deeper, and it's all to do with quality, not always quantity, So if you can compensate by getting really deep, intense sleep with high levels of melatonin and high levels of other hormones, you can achieve similar things. But of course, if you got that for a little bit longer and managed to get that same amount of hormonal release, then you'd just grow bigger and faster. Because we build most of our muscle when we're asleep. You don't build muscle when you're training. That's all about breaking it down to give a chance for it to rebuild. And most of that's happening when you're either in a resting state or sleeping.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you ever recommend people supplementing with melatonin, or do you recommend people obviously, getting out and getting in the daylight and getting that, a lot of light when they wake up, and then, going into a, obviously a room that's, pitch black dark?
Yeah. Well, that's it. The time that I prescribe or recommend melatonin is shift workers that need it during the daytime sleeps. Also studying a lot at night. So if you spend a lot of time on the computer or with your phone and that sort of stuff right until the moment that you go to bed, you don't get those period of darkness and that sort of stuff. You could supplement with a little bit of extra melatonin then. And also too, if you don't have a fully dark room at night, if there's a street light just outside the window, and even a lot of electronic devices, the glow that you can have just coming from the alarm clocks or the iPhones and those sort of stuff is enough to stop that real darkness that we need to get that melatonin production and release. Yeah, so in those sort of cases, and often you do it. The other reason why I prescribe it a lot, again, is for adrenal exhaustion or adrenal maladaptation. Melatonin can be used to force that cortisol to go low so they can go into really deep, refreshing sleep at night.
Okay, so someone like me, who has had, obviously like adrenal fatigue type problems, it's obviously probably a good thing to take. I take 5 milligrams of time release melatonin a night, and I normally get a good sleep from that. Is that a good thing to do?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You'll find there'll be a certain amount of negative feedback, but that's fine. I mean, some people are using stupid doses. Like in my clinic, I go from about 3 milligrams up to about 10 milligrams. But some people are going right over 20 milligrams and that sort of stuff, which is, that's too much. One thing I also hear a lot of people, the feedback I get from people with melatonin is if they get that dose right, they get into this really deep, refreshing sleep, and they can often actually wake up earlier than what they normally would, but feeling wide awake and refreshed. So it gets that quality of sleep in. So they're not needing 10, 11, 12 hours and still feeling shagged. They're getting away with 6 to 8 hours and feeling pretty good. That's what we do with the shift workers.
Yeah, I take the time release one, so it normally lasts about 8 hours. But I remember I was taking the regular melatonin, and I was actually waking up too early. I was waking up 6 hours or so after I went to sleep, and I'd wake up and I'd be wide awake. I don't know if it's because the melatonin had worn off or what it was, but I actually, because this is when I was a lot younger, and I just started taking more and more because I thought that would help. That might help keep me asleep, but it's obviously just making it worse, and I was waking up, wide awake at 5 in the morning and stuff like that. So and lower doses tend to the higher the dose, the more likely you are to it spikes quickly and then drops off quickly, and you'll wake up earlier. They find a 3 milligram where you'd actually sleep a little bit longer. It's strange. Than a 10 milligram sort of thing. So I'm lucky when I forget to take it or I don't take it. We've actually got on our room. We've got shutters on our windows, so we've got a street light right outside. But we're lucky we've got those shutters on there because otherwise it would not be a dark room whatsoever. But lucky it's pretty much pitch black for us. So
and that's common, hey. That's common. And even little things like I had a person the other day and they're saying everything's nice and dark, but then they've got their laptop plugged in and their mouse. It's just got a blue light that just glows all night, and then they got their alarm clock, and then, so, it's really hard. With the miners, they get that, they fully black it out. They even tape that black plastic across the windows and stuff like that during the day, cover the bottom of the door and everything like that with something just to stop any light coming in at all, just to get them, because they'll only be able to get about 6 hours, and they need that quality. So
exactly. I've got a friend working up in the mines. At the moment, he's working, I think, 12-hour days, and it's just ridiculous. He's got to work 12-hour days, and he trains and still has to try to eat and stuff. And he said he only gets about 5 hours or so a night. And he said, it's just when you got to sleep, you got to sleep. So
and that's rough. As you know, it always makes it harder to sleep. As soon as you set that alarm thing, and I've got to get a good quality sleep in and wake up, it's the hardest sleep you'll ever have.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for coming on Aussie Muscle Radio once again. We've got our next segment is 2 Minutes with a Scientist, so that will be up next, and that will feature you, obviously. So I encourage everyone to stay tuned to that. In 2 minutes, that will be on. Thanks, Matt.
Aussie Muscle Radio is a presentation of RX Muscle Australia. The truth in Australian bodybuilding. Visit rxmuscle.com.au for all the latest bodybuilding news, videos, contest coverage, and so much more. Tune in next week at this same time for another round with Xavier Wills and Scott Goebel, only on Aussie Muscle Radio.